Okay. Ariella, thank you so much for joining us here at our More Women in Crypto weekly meetups at the NFT Boutique in Tulum. We met through the Gitcoin grant process, and I got to learn a little bit about Web3 Women in Science. And yeah, I would just love to learn a little bit more about your journey and how you came to found this organization.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, my name's Ariella. By day, I'm an MD PhD student studying medicine and molecular cell biology at Washington University in St. Louis. About a year ago was when I first got into Web3. I knew some people working in a biotech investment DAO, and they knew me and that I moonlight as a science writer and illustrator. So I was recruited to work there and help with some science communication initiatives. And after spending several months in the organization and in the Web3 space in general, and specifically in the Web3 and meets science space, the intersection of those two sectors, I noticed that there really isn't very much diversity. I was in meetings all the time, and it would be, a group of 20 people, and more often than not, it would be 19 white men and me. So very few people of color, very few women, very few people who were in any case openly LGBTQ. And I found that to be a less than ideal environment to work in, and also just not a really great trend. And so I thought that it would be a good idea to talk to some women in the community about their thoughts and see what we could do about it. And so that's what I did. And we started off just, dipping our toes in the water, hosting some Twitter spaces with female founders in this space and making a Telegram group. And then as we started to get more momentum, we decided to go ahead and make it, a thing. So go ahead, make a Discord server, give it its own Twitter account, start putting together a team, producing a plan for the future, a roadmap, maybe apply for some funding. And so that's where we are now. We just finished our first fundraising campaign, which, as you mentioned, was through Gitcoin. And so we're going to have a little funding once I figure out exactly the mechanisms for withdrawing those funds and all of that. And so it's an exciting time for us, kind of just getting off the ground, still slow and steady startup mode.
Amazing. So what are like the different use cases for Web3 in science?
It's a really great question. And I want to say right off the bat that you'll get a different answer depending on who you asked. So I don't think there's one objective truth here. So I'll give you my 2 cents and try to highlight places where there might be some disagreement. I would say the one place that most people seem to agree across a lot of different groups that we really need a new system and Web3 might be an interesting option is in the publishing sector. So I don't know how much you two are familiar with scientific publishing and data sharing. Well, I'll give you a super quick primer. It's pretty archaic and illogical. So to start off with something you might be more familiar with, if you went out and you decided to write an article for a regular like newspaper or magazine, say you were a freelance writer or journalist, you would expect to go and pitch your piece to a journal, pitch your piece to a magazine, journal, newspaper. And if they accept it, you might expect them to pay you something, maybe not that much if you're freelancing, but something, right? And then you publish your piece and you call it a day. So scientific publishing works very differently. Nobody pays you. So the people who are actually doing the research and writing the papers, i.e. the content creators, are not paid. There are 2 different models. So there's the model where money does not change hands during the publishing process, but in that case, your research will be published with a paywall. So the way the journals make money in that case is that people and institutions pay money in order to access that journal. And so that means that your research will only be seen by people who can afford individual subscriptions or people who work at research institutions that pay for those institutional licenses to access those. So that means that a lot of times people in developing countries where the institutions don't have the money to pay for every single subscription service will not be able to access the even research that has already been published. Did you have a question? I saw you.
Yeah, so sorry, does that mean that the writers, the content creators do get paid in that scenario?
No.
No. It's the
No.
publication gets paid.
Yes, that goes to the journal publisher.
I forgot that we were supposed to actually also be translating and being bilingual, so we could be very interesting. Did you, entendiste? Sí, yo le pregunté cuáles son los varios diferentes usos para Web3 para las causas científicas. Y una cosa que es bien común es lo de escribir estos publicaciones, investigaciones que hacen estos científicos, pero no están pagados. Y la única forma que se monetiza son dos formas que recién nos estaba contando. La primera forma es en una publicación donde se hace la publicación de la investigación, pero no se puede tener acceso si no estás pagando por el contenido. Así que solamente la gente que tiene suscripciones a esa publicación pueden tener acceso a esas investigaciones. Y otra forma que estaba comenzando a decirnos. So thank you for letting me translate.
Yeah, and so was that me being prompted to talk about the second format that you can publish? So that's the first model where where money does not change hands between the researchers and the publishers, but the readers of the journal then do have to pay the journal to read the articles. So the second.
En ese modelo todavía no están pagados los que están haciendo el contenido, solamente la publicación. Y lo que sí está cambiando, el intercambio de finanzas es entre el que está leyendo y la publicación. Claro. Okay. Yes,
so in the second model is called open access, and it sounds really good, right? Open access, that sounds like free or something.
Abierto.
It's sort of free. In this case, it's free for the readers. So the open access part means that it's published freely online. Everyone can read it. And there's been recent legislation in the United States saying that taxpayer-funded research by a certain date will all need to be published open access. And a lot of people are very happy about that. But the catch is that in this case for open access, the journals still need to make money. So the researchers actually pay to publish their work. Yeah.
Okay. And it's something about tax funded?
Yeah, so a lot of research that goes on is taxpayer funded. We get grants from the government to do our research. And so that means the government can make some stipulations about what happens, like how that research is conducted and published. And so there's new regulations going into effect saying that certain publicly funded research needs to be published open access and remove those paywalls. But again, that means the researchers will have to pay to publish open access. So that puts accessibility concerns on the researchers instead of the readers.
But then, so they're getting funded by the grant.
Yes, research is typically, a lot of research is funded by grants.
Entonces, el otro modelo es que, bueno, es un nuevo modelo que el gobierno está diciendo que todas esas investigaciones, toda esa información tiene que ser accesible para el público. Entonces, en este modelo, lo que pasa es el científico que está haciendo todas esas investigaciones tiene que pagar. Y sí, pero sí también hay estos fondos que de los gobiernos, de los que estamos pagando impuestos, que dan la fundación a las investigaciones. Okay.
Right. And so the thing about that, though, is that's all very well and good for researchers that come from institutions that are incredibly well funded, typically in North America and Europe. But the problem, again, with open access is that if you are not particularly well funded, it can put a significant burden on the researcher to pay extra money in addition to having to purchase all the materials and pay all the salaries of all their employees to do the research. Now they have to actually pay to publish their research. And even if you do have the money, there is something just, at least from my personal perspective, that feels a little odd about doing all of the work to create all of the content and then having to pay to get it out there when we know that this system is outdated. We know that right now I could make a post on a blog for free of my own and get my research out there. But the problem is that that doesn't really work because we need to be published in respected journals, often called peer-reviewed journals, in order to keep our jobs and get those grants that fund our research in the future. So it's sort of this vicious cycle that we are kept in, where we have to pay to publish in the journals in order to show the grant organizations that we've published research in respectable places in order to get the funding to keep our jobs. And it goes around and around. And I'll give you a moment if you wanted to translate that.
Yeah. The first thing you said was related to, sí, bueno, en este modelo, los que sí ganan acceso y pueden publicar son de las instituciones o academia, que es como más conocido, que ya tienen fondos, así que es como privados, como digamos los Stanfords y Harvards y Yales del mundo, que tienen un montón de fondos, entonces esos fondos pagan por las investigaciones. Y entonces eso es un sistema muy anticuado y también no inclusivo, porque no es solamente como el mundo, sí, exacto. Y además es muy injusto también que el que está haciendo esas investigaciones pone todo el trabajo, pone todo el, tiene que crear prácticamente una compañía, porque tiene que tener asistentes y personas que están trabajando por el mismo tema, ¿no? Es como armar un equipo y ellos tienen que pagarlo también, así que pagar todo eso, hacer todo, poner todo su mente en estos temas y además, encima de eso, tener que pagar por publicar, porque la cosa es que con estos papeles científicos se tienen que estar publicados en publicaciones que son respetadas, conocidas, científicas. Y también una cosa muy importante es este tema de peer review, que quiere decir que tus colegas están leyendo las cosas que tú estás escribiendo, tus investigaciones, para validarlas. Claro. Y ese es un tema muy importante y no lo van a hacer. Sí, ahora estamos en un mundo donde cualquiera puede publicar lo que quiera en su blog, en su Medium, pero si no está hecho en una de estas publicaciones que está respetada, digamos. No tienen valor. Exacto. Okay.
Yeah. And so, so that's the first issue is, the who gets paid for what. It's the system doesn't make a lot of sense, but we're sort of tied into it because, the whole research world is set up that way. And, I heard you mention peer review in there because, that's the idea that we must publish in peer reviewed journals. And if you don't know what that means, that just means that the editors, when they receive our draft manuscripts, they don't by themselves decide whether to publish it or not, or whether it needs any edits. They send it out to other researchers in our field called the peer reviewers, so that they can look through and do a detailed analysis of what we wrote, and if our research looks like it's robust and solid, if we need to do any more experiments or clarify anything in the text before publishing, and then they send their opinions back to us and to the editors, and that's how it's decided if the research is published. The interesting thing is that they are not paid at all. This is all supposed to be volunteered time. So
they're not paid. Oh, that was my question. I was like, do the peer reviewers get paid?
no, they do not. So it's just more researchers contributing to this ecosystem as volunteers. So I don't know if you want me to pause there.
Entonces, eso de peer review, que quiere decir que tus colegas lo ven, revisan, validan, pero una vez que va a la publicación, el editor, no es que el editor puede decidir que se puede publicar, tiene que mandarlo a este network de asociados, de voluntarios, para hacer este reviso del trabajo. Y tampoco ellos están pagados. Es todo gratis.
Exactly.
Wow.
So to understand this a little better, I think we have to remember that this system was created hundreds of years ago when, you know, the journals were doing very important things that the researchers couldn't really do themselves. You know, they were coming in, gathering all of the information, going to the printing presses, you know, making copies, distributing it on paper to everyone in the society. And this was the best method available at the time. Now, like I said, it obviously makes a lot less sense because everyone has the internet and we are perfectly capable of sharing it, you know, without paying the publishers for really what exactly are they providing. Maybe just a place to post it and possibly some help with layout to make it look a little nicer. But other than that, it's really the peer reviewers and the researchers doing all of the work. And sorry, go ahead.
Entonces, bueno, la razón por cual estamos en este sistema es porque se desarrolló hace muchos años, que en esos años sí las publicaciones estaban haciendo ¿cómo me dice? Imprimiendo, no, imprimiendo los papeles y tomando esos costos. Ahora estamos en un nuevo mundo, no es necesario, ¿no? Entonces, es un sistema muy antiguo y bueno, este es so what are you doing to change it? ¿Qué estamos haciendo para cambiarlo?
Yeah, so that's the big question, right? I mean, so just to give you one more issue with this, and that'll give you an idea of why we want to make the change too, is this is no longer a really great way to package information and share it, to write up a manuscript that you cannot change, that gets reviewed, goes through maybe a 6-month process often before it's distributed and then gets published. It actually doesn't make a lot of sense when you're trying to collaborate in real time. There are other methods that we could be using to upload data in, you know, maybe a less polished format, but more accessible format that's easier to aggregate and see as a whole. You know, there should be more modern methods of sharing data than basically, you know, writing everything up as a 10-page article once per year, once every couple of years, right? It doesn't make the most sense.
And collaborative as well.
Right.
Sí, el otro problema con este modelo es que escriben como unas scripts que no sé cuántas páginas sería, 10 páginas, larguísimo, y toma 6 meses para ser aprobado. Y entonces es muy antiguo, no hay manera de colaborar, tienes que hacerlo todo, tener un producto final que quizás te toma un año llegar a ese producto. Así que en vez de hacerlo más en una forma moderna, colaborativa. Okay.
Yeah, so people have known about these problems for a long time, and the open science movement has been around long before Web3 was, you know, was a topic of conversation. I think that It's very possible, though, that Web3 and blockchain technology might actually do a lot to help this movement, because we are seeing a lot of energy and enthusiasm for innovation and creating new systems. And the idea of being able to create an incentive to openly share your research that could be a rival system to the system that we have been using is really attractive. So the existing system is based on basically the reputation that you get from publishing in one of these journals. But if we can actually create an alternate ecosystem, an alternate system of reputation and incentives that we can all recognize, maybe by tokenizing reputation or even financially rewarding people that share their data, then we might be able to tip the scales finally in favor of open science and new systems that have been struggling to gain traction without those incentives in place. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely. Sorry.
So the key aspect, the two key things there are trying to use tokenization, either to create financial incentives or reputation incentives that can be, tracked and shared as a community. So financial or reputation incentives, and seeing if that might be, the secret ingredient that open science has been missing. But to be clear, we don't know. It's still a maybe this will help, but it's an idea.
Pero entonces lo que me está diciendo era que antes de ese movimiento había el movimiento de ciencia abierta, que se reconoce entre todos los científicos que ese es un modo muy antiguado para hacer las cosas, y han tenido bastantes ganas de cambiar el sistema. Y ahora con lo de Web3, que lo de Web3 nos da el potencial de tokenizar esta información o tokenizar para pago o tokenizar para reputación. Porque si tú estás publicando cosas, sube tu reputación en ese tema. Y es lo que todos esos científicos también están.
Importante para el científico.
Eso, sí, exacto.
Yeah, and so there are DAOs that are being that have already formed to try to work out these issues. Maybe there are DAOs forming trying to create a new version of peer review that actually rewards peer reviewers. There's a DAO out there called Talent DAO that's actually run by a trans woman named Renee, and she is trying to create a journal of decentralized research. So actually run a journal as a DAO. So that's a couple things that projects that are out there.
Okay. The first one was that you mentioned.
So there are a lot of projects trying to create new systems of peer review, and there's also a DAO making its own journal of decentralized research, as two examples.
Entonces, tú sabes, los DAOs son organizaciones autónomas descentralizadas, y sí hay estos diferentes formas de como premiar a los que están haciendo el peer review, así que pagarlos, incentivizarlos para hacer las investigaciones, esos papeles. Y también ahora hay un nuevo que se llama Talent DAO, ¿no? Talent DAO está haciendo su propia publicación, que es un DAO de todas estas investigaciones hechas por Web3.
Yeah, and so, I think my personal opinion is that in order to move forward, we will probably have to start with some middle ground that has one foot in the traditional academic community and one foot in the new Web3 community, like maybe make a journal that still uses traditional reputation systems, like can still cite other research and be cited by future research, but uses this alternative system where it's open access and it's you don't have to pay to publish, and the peer review is done by the DAO. I think that that will probably be the first step. I'll pause there.
Y en su opinión cree que el próximo sistema, porque ninguno de esos sistemas están aprobados.
Claro.
Y esto, el próximo etapa seguramente sería una combinación de los dos sistemas,
Claro.
que todavía está usando estas nuevas tecnologías para incentivizar cosas como el review de los colegas, el peer review, o para hasta publicar como ese journal que está haciendo. Pero por ahora piensa que todavía estamos como entre los dos mundos,
Claro.
del Web 2 y del Web 3.
And there are a lot of organizations that exist in the traditional space that are really focused on open data sharing. And there are scientific data sharing, and there are also DAOs forming in that realm, trying to create incentives to share raw research data. I know a friend, Ines, who started NeuroDAO, and it's specifically focusing on computational neuroscience data and creating incentives to share that data among computational neuroscience researchers. In general, a lot of these programs are starting with computational research that can be done completely online and shared online is where a lot of this is starting.
Bastante del movimiento está comenzando con ese compartimiento de información y que sea en una forma abierta que cualquiera puede accesarlo. Y tiene una persona que conoce que ha comenzado un this is harder than it looks.
I've had to translate before, and it's really hard. It's hard when I don't stop soon enough. I can just repeat. I was saying,
we're talking about a lot of these systems are the first step is going through the computational science, because that work can all be done remotely and shared easily. So
a lot of stuff is like social science or computational data science, as opposed to like clinical research and wet lab research with mice, because it can be, just for a lot of reasons, it can be a little harder to transition that to an online system.
Y estos sistemas de ciencia abierta están comenzando con matemática, computational, ciencia computacional. Oh, I have such a hard time with this. Sí, que son más como basados en matemática, basados en que se puede hacer las investigaciones por cada quien por su compu, en vez de tener que estar ahí en un laboratorio poniéndole inyecciones a pericotes.
Yeah, and so in addition to publishing and data sharing, the other sectors that come into play with science are, of course, in order to publish the research, you have to first do the research, like I was saying, and in order to do the research, you need to get funding to buy everything that's needed to do it. So maybe I'll pause there so you can just set the scene. We have, get the money, do the research, publish the research as our three main sectors.
Entonces, sí, bueno, el problema es que para poder hacer todo, se tiene que primero, Francesca's es sacar los fondos para poder hacer las investigaciones y después publicar. Así que es un triángulo de trabajo que cada ciclo también necesita sus fondos.
Yeah, and so there are Web3 organizations and individuals that are interested in trying to create Web3 versions of and Web3 solutions for those sectors as well, the actual doing the research and funding the research. As I said before, for doing the research, a lot of that is starting with social science and computational data science, because it is, again, easier to do remotely. And there's also a lot less regulatory hurdles. You can't just order a bunch of animals into your home and start experimenting on them and publish that, that is generally not a good idea.
No.
Yeah.
Entonces, los dos tipos de investigaciones que están como comenzando en esos nuevos etapas de Web3 porque son más fácil, no tan complicados, bueno, complicados en el senso de no tienes que irte por la burocracia, exacto. Y entonces es los social sciences, las ciencias sociales y estas ciencias computacionales, que también todas se pueden hacer a lo lejos en vez de tener que, porque hay muchas regulaciones sobre si vas a traer animales en tu casa o en tu laboratorio para poder hacer los experimentos que se necesitan hacer.
But there are actually some organizations even trying to go farther. There's an organization called LabDAO, and they are doing a lot. They are trying to build out systems where we could do that kind of research that requires chemicals and animals by either creating a network of researchers that basically barters research services with each other, or employing contract research organizations, which are basically like you pay a company that does research as a service to produce some results for you.
Interesting. Okay, pero sí hay organizaciones que sí están tratando de cambiar esos sistemas también y aplicar esas tecnologías a trabajo que sería en el laboratorio, ¿no? Claro. Que o crean una comunidad de científicos y hacen como que tal cual haga una porción de la investigación, o también hay organizaciones que se contratan para hacer partes de las investigaciones.
Yeah, and then the last sector that I mentioned is funding. And funding is an interesting one because, this is what a lot of people think of when they think of crypto is make money, distribute money. Let's get into DeFi, decentralized finance. And there are organizations that are trying to raise funds and use them to be an alternative funding source for researchers so that the researchers don't need to rely on traditional sources such as the government. I'll pause there.
Yeah, that was actually, I would have thought that would have been like the original and first use cases, the funding use case. Pero hay también el otro uso para poder sacar los fondos para hacer las investigaciones, ¿no? Y eso para mí es como lo más clásico de Web3, que es usar este nuevo sistema que tenemos para crecer la comunidad y aplicar la comunidad en estos casos que son importantes a la comunidad.
Yeah, so there are a lot of challenges.
Sí.
There are a lot of challenges with this. So I work in biomedical research. Biomedical research is so expensive. So it is one thing for the government of the United States to write a check for $1 million, for a research project. Sure, they can write a lot of those checks every year, but it is not so easy. Sorry, my cat is meowing.
Go, we have cats.
Go
We're big cat fans over here.
If you're gonna meow, then you gotta say hi.
Yes.
All right. This is Mochi.
Oh, good Mochi. So cute.
If you're gonna meow, then you gotta say hi and show off your belly.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Go play.
Oh.
So biomedical research costs a lot of money. Now, it's not the kind of thing where you can write a check for $10,000 usually and get anything done. The other challenge is that generally in crypto, there's a lot of interest in getting a return on investment. Now, research can be broken down into a few different phases. Well, let's just talk about biomedical research for a second, because it really differs depending on the specific brand. But I'm particularly in biomedical research. So there's obviously the last stage with this like clinical trials. You have a drug or something that you want to get tested. And then before that, you know, maybe you do preclinical research in animals, let's say. And before that, you probably want to do some basic research, maybe in cells, to figure out some mechanism that you want to target. And that is an oversimplification, but let's just go with that for now.
Y el tipo de investigación, I'm just switching this up a little bit. I got tired of holding it. Okay, let's see here. Okay. El tipo de investigaciones que Ariella hace es biomédico, así que eso normalmente para fundear una investigación cuesta como hasta $1 millón, que para un gobierno no es tan difícil, pero para otros proyectos no es, otras compañías no es fácil de asegurar esos tipos de fondos. Y hay varias etapas en cada parte de este tipo de investigación. Hay los pre-trials, que son lo que se hace en los animales, y después los trials, donde llegas a la gente, y esto toma como ¿cuánto tiempo? This takes, sorry, I'm like speaking to you in Spanish. This would take like, you know, a course of years, yeah, right?
Yeah. Of course. And so as you move from the I have an idea phase all the way up to the I am testing my idea in humans, you know, it starts costing a lot of money and a lot of resources as you get further along. And there's something that we call the valley of death in research, which is when you're talking about more basic, like you're in the I have an idea stage, you're looking at mechanisms, generally the government is happier to fund that. That feels like an academic exercise, and you know, and it's like in their price range and they're ready. And once you get to the end, where you have a product and it seems like it's really working in animals, and now you just need to test it in humans and you're ready to make some money on it, that's when like pharma and big VCs are ready to come in and sponsor your research because they're expecting to get paid. But then in the middle, there's kind of all this research that's in some sort of preclinical area that nobody is willing to touch. I'll pause there for you.
Yeah. Entonces, es como se toma bastante tiempo. Al comienzo, bueno, cuando ya se llega a hacer un producto que ya está listo para el mercado, comienza a costar más y más y más. Y en el comienzo, en el primer etapa, en el último etapa, hay una cosa que se llama el Valle de la Muerte. El Valle de la Muerte, igual, porque en el comienzo, si es una idea, es una cosa que el gobierno sí puede ver que es una cosa interesante, quizás de academia, así que es más en línea con las cosas que funda el gobierno. Al final, cuando ya está listo para entrar al mercado, ahí se ponen los inversores, son los capitalistas, venture capitalists y los otros fundadores, que lo que están buscando es ese return ROI, ¿no? La ganancia. En el medio hay un montón de proyectos que están, exacto, así, ahí en esta Valle de Muerte.
Right, and so this middle area of research is interesting. You know, sometimes you get these ideas that are too far along, too businessy for the government to feel like they're going to fund it. You know, maybe too expensive, too businessy, but not quite far enough along for a VC to be interested, or just doesn't seem profitable enough for VC to be interested. And this is a sector where you know, there's been some interest in trying to fill that void with Web3 funds and take an approach that's not really a pure VC approach, but also not a pure, you know, altruistic grant funding approach. I would call it maybe venture philanthropy. It's sort of this hybrid where people are raising funds for you know, a goal that they believe in. That's sort of the philanthropy part, But also, if the project succeeds and it starts generating income, there's an expectation of benefiting from, from the proceeds. So it's called like venture philanthropy is how I would put it. And this is, again, a generalization. Every project is a little bit different.
Entonces, con esto de Web3 hay mucho interés en esos proyectos o bastante interés en estos proyectos que son en ese medio, que quizás no son, ya son pasados para el gobierno que toma interés, así que sí están avanzados, pero todavía no al potencial de entrar al mercado. Entonces, hay mucho interés en la comunidad de Web3 de fundear este particular etapa de proyectos que y el nombre que le está poniendo es you said philanthropic, sorry,
Venture philanthropy.
Venture philanthropy. Venture philanthropy. That's the translation. que aunque estás poniendo los fondos a una causa que te interesa, si se avanza el proyecto, vas a querer tener un ingreso sobre la inversión que hiciste.
Right. And so that's sort of a broad overview of the ecosystem here. And so there's a lot of interest in transforming all these different components of scientific research. But I would caution anyone who thinks that it's ready to take over the scientific ecosystem. I think these are really early projects, and I'm glad that there's a lot of interest in this space and a lot of energy behind, trying new ideas and innovating. But I don't think that anyone has really figured it out all the way yet. I think that some people are getting close to figuring out how to really make a difference. But right now, I think everything out there, it's mostly interesting pilot experiments into different ways to innovate this space.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, I think that's all of Web3 also.
Yeah.
que no hay nada que está probado como modelo. No, todavía no está probado estos modelos para poder fundear estas investigaciones científicas. Pero hay muchas interés, hay muchas novedades que están pasando y hay algunos proyectos que sí están agarrando tracción, pero hasta ahora no sabemos qué o cómo va a ser el éxito en este mundo, pero yo creo que es igual como todo interesante, sobre todo porque es una ciencia para inspirar la innovación. Lo único que detiene la ciencia también puede ser la estructura de que arraigan con cosas tradicionales, burocracia, cosas que si rompe eso va a tener un poder de aceleración. Estamos con la ciencia, nada más innovador que la ciencia. Los proyectos van a ser casi validados. Sí. Va a tener una validación social que el que quiere invertir, yo tengo una aprobación social. Yes. Yes. Yeah, Rachel was saying that she sees science as one of the key pillars to innovation, and that that there's this is really like such an exciting if it can be proven and the ability to gather communicate. I feel like my brain is not doing the reverse translation. Es un pilar de innovación y la innovación creo que va a ser acelerado. Arriba y rompiendo la vergüenza. Rompiendo la parte tradicional. Sí. Yeah, she just finds it super exciting that if we can actually break the bureaucracy, that it's going to accelerate innovation, at like such a faster pace. Sí, ese valle de la muerte va a desaparecer, porque ya no vamos a tener inversión, los inversionistas ya van a estar bien, y no toda la gente que está hackeando, que está probando tu proyecto, sabe. Yeah, and then you have like the strength of the social validation, and she's saying that with that, we can kill the valley of death. and accelerating.
Yeah.
Accelerating these new innovations, which is like really, for social good as well, which is so exciting.
Yeah, it is really exciting. I think that we are at a crossroads here and see how it'll all play out. I always like to caution people, like, the ideas, they do sound good and they do sound exciting, but bureaucracy, everyone hates bureaucracy. It's annoying, it slows things down, but also just as a scientist and medical professional, and I am still part of the traditional academic world, I do want to caution everyone that sometimes the bureaucracy is important for some things. Like, some of these regulations do protect people and do protect the world from bad actors. And, some of this is here for a reason. And so there is a delicate balance that I hope we can strike. And we don't want to swing too far in the other direction where science becomes a, Wild West, free for all. That can get very dangerous very quickly. It's all about balance.
Sí, es todo sobre la balanza y encontrar la forma de sí retener las cosas buenas, la burocracia que de alguna forma nos protegen a nosotros, porque no puede ser abrirlo a todo. Sí.
Ahora hay personas que dan su opinión y a veces está abierto que todos opinen bien, y tampoco obviamente no lo puede ser, pero sí creo que va a ser el desafío encontrar justamente la correcta validación, y ya con eso va.
But once we get to that, like the social validation and get to that balance, that point of balance and finding that balance, then yeah, that's when get to the moon.
Yeah, and one thing that I really want to emphasize about science in general and this decentralized science movement is that it's we've seen this trend, like especially with COVID, I'm sure everyone noticed, where there's a divide between the scientific and non-scientific communities, and there's not a lot of trust. And I'm really passionate about public science education and public, the public feeling more involved and trusting in science. And so one of the things that drew me to decentralized science was this idea that we could have an organization that's made up of scientists and other professionals in other fields all coming together to work on scientific concepts and have everybody feel more involved and invested in science, so that it doesn't seem like such a foreign concept.
Sí, y una cosa que cierto nos pasó en estos años es que hemos tenido una división entre el público y la ciencia, y que ella quiere que con esa nueva tecnología, estos nuevos sistemas, que podemos involucrar el público más. Entonces, estos grupos son grupos que son una mezcla de científicos y también de otras profesiones, y haciendo más envuelto en la ciencia, ya poder ganar más la confianza del público, que ahora no tiene mucha confianza.
Right, and so
a veces creen que no están hablando de ciencia y no entiendo nada, entonces involucrar su aporte súper valioso, y también
that just because you don't have the scientific training does not mean that you can't be part of the conversation and can't be involved, but it can be, that's also, part of why we have this group, More Women in Crypto, is that so we can together learn together and break down these topics and translate them in ways that we all understand. That's really what More Women in Crypto is about.
Exactly. So we're really aligned on that. And, just as an example, say there's some scientific or medical issue that you are interested in, and if you had the chance, you would like to contribute to. So just hypothetically, say you were really interested in women's health and women's reproductive health. There's a new DAO that's just been forming called Athena DAO that's focused on women's reproductive health. And so whereas it might be difficult for you to join, the board of a nonprofit charity fundraising for women's health, difficult, or, you know, it may be impossible to join a research lab working on this with your particular background, you would have the option right now. You could go online and join the Athena DAO community, and you could tell them your skills. So for example, on this call, I've learned that you have excellent translation skills, and you could say, you know, and so you too could come in and you could say, listen, you know, is there something that you've written that you'd like, you know, help getting out to our community? We can translate it and distribute it for you, because we're interested in, you know, achieving this scientific medical, you know, goal that you have. And we can't, you know, go in and do the primary research ourselves, but that doesn't mean that we can't find a way to contribute and take some ownership of this project and be involved and feel invested in the outcome. And so I think that that's what keeps me in the Web3 space, despite all of the toxicity and scams that I hear, that I encounter. Like, what keeps me here is this idea that it does seem like a unique place where anyone in any part of the world with any set of skills can feel more involved in these scientific and medical projects than they would have the opportunity to otherwise. So it could bridge that gap. Yeah. Sorry, that was long. That's going to be held.
No, it was really good. It was interesting. La cosa que sí es muy interesante porque, por ejemplo, si yo tengo un interés en la salud de mujeres, no es que yo, como no teniendo esa educación, la academia de científica, yo no podría como meterme a un non-profit o una organización para ser más involucrada en el tema, ¿no? Porque tendría que tener, no sé, los contactos, la educación, llegar a ese punto. Al revés, con Web3, como nosotras, y ahora se va a poner a hacer traducción, dice que cualquiera puede compartir sus skills, sus talentos en cualquier manera, no tiene que tener el conocimiento científico, pero puede ser parte de estas comunidades y ser parte de esos proyectos que están avanzando en humanidad.
So, you know, I think that's a good point for me to say, if you or anyone else in your community is interested in this topic and looking to find ways to get involved, you know, so my organization, Web3 Women in Science, the whole point of our existence is really to create a safe, inclusive, informative environment for anyone curious about this, coming in with any type of background. And so I'd encourage you to join our server and our Telegram, you know, introduce yourself in the server, write about what kind of skills you have and what you're interested in, and see if we can't help, you know, keep you up to date on projects that you might be interested in participating in. And, you know, you can just hang around and hear about our news and take it from there.
Definitely. I'm going to start getting really geeky. And thank you so much. Quería decir que este es un buen punto para invitar a nuestras comunidades que quizás les interesan estos temas para aprender un poco, ponerse en el server de Discord y interactuar con esos científicos y aprender de estos temas que son muy importantes en el mundo y para la humanidad. Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your patience with our technical difficulties. I still want the metaverse to work, the NFT Boutique-verse to work. But this was a really good conversation. I think it'll be really valuable to our communities, to more women in crypto, and to a lot of the Latina networks that I'm a part of as well, and women in Web3 networks. So we'll definitely be sharing it. And yeah, it was a great, super interesting conversation. Yeah.
Well, maybe you can take the recording and put it up in your little showroom and, you know, have a watch party, or let people come in and watch it themselves. So maybe it still can take place in years.
We will do that. We are going to do that. We're going to do that. And I'll point people to it. Okay, Ariella, well, thank you so much. Just really appreciate your time and the download of such amazing information.
Thank you for having me, and definitely anyone feel free to DM me with questions. So my name on Twitter and everything is Ariella Studies. And once again, the organization is Web3 Women in Science. So on Twitter, we're Web3 Women in Sci, SCI, because the name is too long to fit in a Twitter username.
Yes.
So hope to see you all around. DMs are
Yeah,
open.
thank you. I'll post all of your links and yeah, thanks again. It was really a fascinating conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Have a good night.
So much. Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.